Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you guys back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So, for today's video, I'm going to be doing a discography review on one of my favorite metal bands known as Strapping Young Lad. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen me post a few of my Strapping Young Lad CDs on there. I discovered this band about 16 years ago. It was around the same time that I actually got into Devin Townsend, his solo work. And when I discovered SYL, as a lot of the fans like to call them. But Strapping Young Lad, they were a Canadian extreme metal band which was formed by Devin Townsend back in '94. The members included, well, I say the final lineup, the classic lineup was Devin Townsend on lead vocals, guitars, keyboards, Jed Simon on guitars, backing vocals, Byron Stroud on bass and backing vocals, and Gene Hoglan on drums. Of course, Gene Hoglan. He is a well-renowned drummer in the metal community. He's played in several bands. He was in Testament. He played in Death. He also played in Dark Angel. So he has a resume. He also played in Fear Factory, I believe. I think he did one album with Fear Factory, as well as Byron Stroud. And Jed Simon. I'm not sure what other bands he played in Frontline Assembly, which is a well-renowned industrial band from Canada. And he's also in the band Vimic. Vimic, that's that band that Joey Jordison was in before he unfortunately passed away. But yeah, man, I really dig this band. When I discovered them and got into their music, they instantly became one of my favorite metal bands. They have a pretty short discography. They only have 5 studio albums. I think they do have a couple of miscellaneous albums. I think they got one live album that they did, and then there's a greatest hits album, a compilation that they put out a couple of years after they disbanded. But yeah, they lasted from 1994 up until 2007. There was a bit of hiatus in the late 90s after their second album, City. But yeah, Devin Townsend, he decided to officially dissolve the band in 2007 so he could concentrate and focus on his prolific solo career, which has really taken off. So without further ado, let's get into this video and discuss these records, if you will. So the first album we're going to talk about, of course, is the debut, which is Heavy as a Really Heavy Thing, released in 1995. This version that I have, this is the 2006 remaster version. So it comes with about 4 bonus tracks that are really good, as well as some really cool liner notes from Devin Townsend himself. So essentially, Heavy as a Really Heavy Thing, this is pretty much a Devin Townsend solo album released under the Strapping Young Lad name, because he performed majority of the music on his own on this album. I think there might have been a few songs on here where he brought in a few additional players to come in and help him on a few stuff. One of them being Jed Simon. He did additional guitar on Critic and Skin Me. And of course, Jed Simon will go on to be a full-time member of the band once Devin Townsend put together a full band. But yeah, it's essentially a solo record. He did most of this by himself. The songs on this album actually derived from a demo that Devin was shopping around called Noisescapes. He was shopping this demo around, as well as another demo that would later evolve into his solo album Ocean Machine that would come out in '97. But the Noisescapes demos, that's what caught on first. He was shopping them around to a few labels, Relativity, who he had been signed with, and also who he was signed with while he was in Steve Vai's band when they did the Sex and Religion album. Roadrunner was another label, and Metal Blade. There's actually a funny story about Roadrunner, because they actually signed Devin to that label, and the president or CEO, he decided to not go forward with Devin. And there's a funny story behind that y'all should check out on Devin Townsend's podcast that he talks about. But in any case, he was getting rejected by a lot of these labels. They didn't really understand what Devin was doing with this sound, because at the time, the music on here was quite different from what anything in metal was what was going on in metal at the time. And the labels that he was shopping them to really didn't understand it, and they didn't know what to do with it. But Century Media is the label that actually took interest and signed Devin. Of course, at this time, Century Media was a very small metal label. Now they're one of the most renowned metal labels out there, especially for underground metal. But at the time, they were a very small label, and they signed them based off of those Noisescapes demos. And if I'm correct, Devin did not re-record any of the music on this album. These are the Noisescapes demos that he later changed into the name to Strapping Young Lad. He just made the song. Century Media gave him enough money to where he could have the demos mixed and mastered so they would sound better. Because like I said, Century Media was a very small label around this time. So that's what he did. He took the money that they gave him, that they was able to give him, and he had the demos mixed and mastered. So what you're hearing is the demos that he was shopping around when they were known as Noisescapes. But I really enjoyed this record. I think it was a solid debut album. Unfortunately, at the time that it was released, it didn't really catch on a lot with the metal audience, but the critics really enjoyed this record. I think Metal Hammer gave this album a pretty good review. Yeah, Andy Stout from Metal Hammer called it one of the most disturbing albums you will hear for a very long time. I'm sure he meant that in a positive way. Let's see here. But Devin Townsend, he has repeatedly expressed his distaste for this record. He dismissed it in his liner notes, which I remember reading, contending that it only had 2 great songs, whatever. I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of great moments on this record. My only criticism about this record would be that it is a bit inconsistent. It's kind of all over the place. It doesn't really have a consistent kind of sound or theme as the later albums would, but that's not really a big issue for me. Aside from that, and I could be contradicting myself when I say this, but I think the fact that it's a bit all over the place is what makes it more appealing to me personally, and it just keeps it interesting. It's not a boring record by any means. And I also like the fact that Devin did most of the music on here by himself. I kind of resonate with that because I feel as though if I was a musician of his caliber, that's what I would do. I would want to do the music all by myself. Maybe have one other person do it with me, but I wouldn't want to do the whole full band thing. So I really respect any musician that can do a whole album like this with little to no help, only like by themselves. And I would say that this is probably the most industrial sounding out of most of Strapping Young Lad's albums, because Devin did use a drum machine. The drum parts are not done by an actual drummer. It's Devin on the drum machine, and you can tell in a lot of songs such as COD Metal King. That's one that you can really tell. And I believe that he was heavily influenced by like Fear Factory, Godflesh, Ministry, that type of industrial metal that was real popular, that was gaining so much ground around that time. And you can kind of hear those influences in a few of the songs, but Devin manages to bring his own twist, his own style and flavor to the tracks that make them unique. So you don't quite get that full like signature Strapping Young Lad sound on here, because like I said, this is really a demo, but it's coming together. It's coming to fruition, because you have to understand, Devin had been working on these demos like when he was in Steve Vai's band. When they did the Sex and Religion album, he was still working on his solo stuff on his own time as well. But I still think that it's a solid debut record. It only sold 143 copies in its first 6 months. So like I said, it didn't really catch on with the metal community in the beginning. But I think in retrospect, people really look at this album as a classic. And I can concur, man. I think it's a good, solid debut album, man. So it's definitely one that's worth checking out. If you do find a copy of this, try to get the 2006 remastered version, because it comes with these really cool bonus tracks. One of them being a cover of Judas Priest's Exciter, which I believe Devin Townsend actually auditioned for Judas Priest when Rob Halford left the band. I believe he actually sent in an audition tape and he used that song Exciter. So that might be the version that he used in that audition. And then songs like Satan's Ice Cream Truck, which is kind of funny. You take some brutal metal and mix it with ice cream truck sounds. Japan and Monday are some really dope tracks as well, man. But this is definitely an album that I would not overlook. Definitely one that's worth listening to. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the second Strapping Young Lad album, and this one is known as City, released in 1997, and this was actually the first Strapping Young Lad album that included a full band. So Devin recruited Gene Hoglan on drums. He got Jed Simon on guitar and Byron Stroud on bass, and that is what solidified the final and classic lineup of Strapping Young Lad. And that's the lineup that continued up until the band dissolved in 2007. City is one of the most remarkable metal albums to ever be released, especially in extreme metal. I would say that City is the record that really not only put Strapping Young Lad on the map, but it also put Devin Townsend on the map. I think people started to pay a lot more attention to Devin Townsend when this album came out. And he was still working on his solo stuff. I think around this time, while they were writing and recording City, he was also working on his Ocean Machine album, which I think that album came out maybe a few months after City. But listen, if you've never listened to City, you are missing out on one of the greatest metal masterpieces ever released. Like, if you haven't never listened to this record, pause this video now, go on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you consume your music, and listen to this album. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Like, listening to City is like going through like a journey or having an experience, honestly, because the way that Devin took extreme metal, the brutality of thrash and death metal and so forth, and industrial, and then he blended it with this beautiful ambient like atmosphere and so forth. It was just amazing. And I don't want to go too deep into this album because I actually did a solo review on City about 2 years ago when I was doing the podcast thing. So I'll probably have a link of it at the end of this video for you guys to go check out that solo review where I go more in depth into the songs and so forth, man. But that's really all I can really say, man, is that this is a metal masterpiece. And if you've never listened to it, you're truly missing out on a great work because every song on here is remarkable. There's even a cover song on here called Room 429 that, even though it's a cover song, it still fits well within the context of the music on this record. It just fits the whole theme and concept of this album. But this is where I think Devin really started to bring in that signature sound. This is where the vocal layering really came into more effect. The keyboards, they give that ambient atmosphere that add a little bit of melody in contrast with the like brutality and extremities of the thrash and death metal influences. And just a great record, man. Like, if you look up City, man, you will see this album pop up on so many lists of like the greatest metal albums of all time, and it deserves every last one of those accolades, excuse me. So when you come across City anywhere, pick it up because you're in for a wonderful journey. It's just a remarkable record, man. So definitely check out City, man. This is one of my favorite Strapping Young Lad albums, hands down. All right, so now we're going to move to the third Strapping Young Lad album. That's the self-titled, released in 2003. I actually, as of recording this video, I've actually just recently purchased this album on a physical copy. So this was the last one that I needed in order to complete my Strapping Young Lad CD collection. So my thoughts on the self-titled album is that even before I had a physical copy, I thought it was a good record. But coming off the heels sort of City, because there was a gap in between City and the self-titled because Devin put the band on hiatus to focus on his solo albums. On its own, I would say that the self-titled album is probably one of the best extreme metal albums to ever be released. That's on its own. But in the context of Strapping's whole discography, I think that the album is slightly underwhelming. And that's because, coming off of City, everything that they did with City, man, was just phenomenal. And, the self-titled album, I can only rank that as being a good record. It's got a good selection of songs that are enjoyable. But for the most part, self-titled almost sounded like a record to just put out. It almost sounded like it was just a record that they just wanted to put out. And I honestly don't think that I don't think his heart was really into the band at this point. I think he was still more focused on his solo stuff because I believe he was recording SYL, as I like to call this album. I believe he was recording this one and his solo album, or the first album known as the Devin Townsend Band, Accelerated Evolution. I believe he recorded both of these albums around the same time, and I think his focus was more into that record than it was on Strapping Young Lad. And if you listen to the Devin Townsend podcast on YouTube, he talks about what was going on during this period. And I actually watched this the other day as of the recording of this video, and he pretty much admitted that he kind of phoned it in on this record, that he really wasn't that into it. I think what it was, the other members of the other members wanted to come back together and put out another record, and he just went along. He was like, yeah, okay, let's just do it. But with that being said, even though I think that this album is a slightly underwhelming compared to City and the next two records they would do after a self-titled, I still think this is a good record. It still got some enjoyable songs. It's still heavy, still brutal. This is SYL's probably most like pure metal album, and what I mean is that it's very subdued, it's very stripped down. There's not a lot of the vocal layering that you heard on the other albums. There's that wall of sound production that Devin is known for. It's not really there. It's just a straight up like extreme metal record, man. It's raw. It's like raw energy, and it's good. There's some good songs on here. I mean, I think the song Relentless, which I think was the sole single from the album, that's one of the biggest highlights on here. I think, let's see, Aftermath, Last Minute, Dirt Pride, Bring on the Young. Those are some phenomenal tracks as well. I even like the intro track called Dire, which is really like a short instrumental. That's a really great song. That song and Relentless, I think, are the two best examples where the band slightly kind of keeps in remnants of what they did on City, where they're adding in that aggressiveness with the melody and so forth. But for the most part, man, to me, it was just very toned down and subdued. And Devin has admitted that. He even did an interview with Metal Injection about 2 years ago, and they asked him what was his least favorite Strapping Young Lad album. And he said that this one was the one that he was least proud of. He felt like the material on there was good and that it had the potential to be greater than what it was, but he just really wasn't into it at that point. He kind of phoned it in. But with that being said, there's a lot of people that consider this one to be their favorite Strapping Young Lad album. And, to each his own. Like I said, I think it's a good record. But listening to it, I've enjoyed the songs. But when you hold it up against City and Alien and The New Black, it just kind of falters in comparison to those records, man. But all in all, I still think it's a record that's worth checking out and worth listening to. And for all I know, because of that raw, stripped down sound, this may be a more accessible record for some people who want to get into the band. So yeah, not necessarily one of the best in their discography, but definitely a good record. It's far from being a garbage or terrible album. It's still a great record. And that says a lot about the band. That says a lot about Devin Townsend as a songwriter, that he can make an album that's maybe not as remarkable as others and it still be really good. So that says a lot about him as a musician and songwriter. But yeah, Strapping Young Lad, self-titled, 2003, man. Okay, so the next album, this is another one of my favorites right here, man. I think I bought this in Alien around the same time, but City. I bought this in City around the same time, but this one is called Alien. This was released in 2005, and I don't know, man. Maybe some of you out there who are Strapping Young Lad fans as well to come across this video, maybe you could relate to this, but I've always kind of felt like Alien and City were connected. Like, to me, Alien was the true follow-up to City. That's the way I felt. To me, there's always been this kind of connection. I don't know if it's kind of like the similarity in the covers, where it's kind of dark and kind of minimalist or whatever, but to me, those two albums just felt like they're connected somehow. And I think because when I was listening to Devin's podcast, he talked about how when he did Alien, he was trying in a lot of ways to he was trying to get to the same success he had with City. He was trying to equal that or outdo that success. And although there was like some destructive like behaviors that went into that, which if you listen to the podcast, he goes more in depth about that. I think he did it. I think he did it. I think he actually put out an album that equal or might even be better than City in some ways. To me, it just has that kind of same kind of structure in some ways, but it's just turned up a notch. Like the intensity is just turned up a whole lot more notches on this album than it was on City, man. And a lot of that went into like mental health issues and things that Devin was having at this time. And you know, most people consider City to be the quintessential Strapping Young Lad album, but Devin himself, he personally is most proud of Alien because he said that when he did this record, he knew that he no longer wanted to continue with SYL, and that all the personal things that went into making this record, he knew that it changed his life. He knew that he had to change his lifestyle, and because he was having mental health issues, and he ended up flipping out during the recording of this record. But like I said, if you listen to the podcast, Devin Townsend podcast, where he talks about Alien, he goes really in depth into everything that was happening around this period. But I just really enjoy this record, man. Like I said, to me, it's the true follow up to Alien. I feel like City and Alien are siblings. That's how connected I feel that those records are. But very heavy, very aggressive. You get a lot of like kind of Meshuggah influence, like rhythms and stuff on here. I mean, the intensity is just up there, man. Like songs like Skeesis, Shitstorm, Love. Yeah, speaking of Love is actually the biggest song of Strapping Young Lad's career. That's another thing. Alien was like another breakthrough for Strapping Young Lad. If anything, it took them even further into popularity, honestly, because Love is their most recognized song. That's their most well-known song, and a lot of people, the opening riff, that riff has been kind of bitten by a lot of people. I know there was a controversy about a song that Machine Head did that had that riff, that same riff, but it was nothing big. Devin Townsend didn't like get mad or anything about it. He kind of just said, well, the riff that I did was a rip off of another song. But in any regards, man, Love is a great track. I think that's the sole single from the album, but that's gone on to become SYL's biggest song. Then you got songs like Shine and We Ride, Possession. Great tracks, heavy, intense. But then you got a song like 2 Weeks, which is pretty much just almost like a melodic acoustic track. There's no intensity. It's a beautiful song. I actually enjoy it. It's a very beautiful song. It's just minimalist, acoustic. Devin singing in his clean vocals, which he does such a great job of. Then you got a song like I'm trying to see if I pronounce this right. The Lamis. The Lamis has black metal influences in Devin's vocal tone and in certain parts of the song. The way it sounds, it's very reminiscent of like black metal. And then Zen is another banger, more of kind of a thrash metal kind of track with blast beats, maybe like a death thrash track, but kind of some melodic guitar playing and choruses and stuff, but a very intense song nonetheless. And Info Dump is just like this static with Morse code in it, which I think Devin, I don't know why he did that. He explained it in the podcast. I know I keep talking about it, but it's good to really listen to these podcasts where he talks about these albums, because you get a lot of in-depth information about what went into the recording of these records. But just another phenomenal record, man. This is another one of my favorites from Strapping Young Lad. It's just a great record all around, man. Definitely one that you need to check out. I put it up there in the same category as City. But Alien is a good one, man. Definitely check this album out when you get a chance, man. Very intense, very heavy, but also it's got some beautiful parts to it as well that's really great. So definitely check this album out too. And now we get down to the last one on this discography review, The New Black, released in 2006. This is the final album for Strapping Young Lad. Even though Devin said that he knew that when he did Alien that he no longer wanted to continue with the band, 2006 they put out their final record, which is The New Black. And this album, I gotta tell you, man, Strapping Young Lad, to me, I know there's a lot of people that really are pining for, like a reunion, but I don't think there really should be another Strapping Young Lad reunion. I think the band really finished on a high note, and plus Devin, he's not in that same mind frame as he was when he was doing Strapping Young Lad. He's a different person now, but they finished on a high note with this record. This is another one of my favorite. My top 3 Strapping Young Lad albums are City, Alien, and The New Black. Definitely a phenomenal record. You know, they finished on a high note, and that's what you want. You want your favorite bands to go out with a bang. Cause there's a lot of bands that just keep on going and keep on going and keep on going until they don't even have that spark no more. And then when they finally go out, they kind of go out mediocre. They kind of go out in mediocrity. But Strapping didn't do that, man. They called it quits at the right time, and they finished with a phenomenal record. The New Black, you know, this time around, you know, this record is more melodic, but it's still heavy, still intense. I think I read somewhere where Devin said he took a lot of influence from like listening to Metallica and like kind of traditional heavy metal, and you can kind of hear that in the music, man. You can hear like that more melody that you would hear in traditional metal. A few of the industrial influences are coming back, which also made a return in Alien, the previous record. But so many great songs. This is all killer, no filler. And I could pretty much say that about every one of these albums. I wouldn't necessarily say any of these albums are necessarily filler. Even the filler on some of them are really good, but this one is just all killer. Every track from the start to finish, man, just remarkable. What's some of my favorite tracks on here? Decimator, the opener. You Suck is a funny one. I like Anti-Prada. Anti-Prada is a very interesting track because there's a part in the song where like these horns come in and it kind of gets a little jazzy in the rhythm and in that part of the song, which I thought was really cool. Let's see, Wrong Side, which is the soul single from the album, is a phenomenal. Monument, Hope, Far Beyond Metal. Far Beyond Metal was actually a live song that the band will perform on tour. It's like a parody, tongue-in-cheek, sense of humor track for that they will perform live for the fans during tours, and they finally made a studio version of it for this record. And that's something else about the self-titled, you know, to revert back to that. The self-titled didn't have a lot of the sense of humor and stuff that the band is known for. It didn't have a lot of Devin's sense of humor, and with this record, it kind of came back. Alien really didn't have it either, but yeah, Devin brought back that sense of humor and stuff with this album. So many great tracks, man. The New Black, every song on this album is just great, man. I really enjoy this record. One of my favorites. Like I said, man, I know I keep repeating myself, but the band, they went out with a bang and they finished on a high note, and that's how you should go. That's how a great band should go. You know, when it's time to call it quits the right way. And they did it with this record. And this also comes with a bonus disc. I think I bought this off of eBay. There's a bonus disc that got it's like a bonus CD sampler, I think, of bands that were signed to Century Media at the time. But yeah, just a wonderful record, man. And like I said, man, it doesn't really matter whether Strapping Young Lad gets back together or not, because we got all these we got these great 5 studio albums that they did, and they definitely finished with a phenomenal record right here with The New Black. Glad to own this one, man. One of my favorites from them. All right, so that's it for this video. My discography review on Strapping Young Lad. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it. Had a lot of fun going back revisiting these albums and listening to this music, because Strapping Young Lad was a great extreme metal band. They're a band that I always push for, because more people, especially in metal, should know about them, because they made such great music. And also check out Devin Townsend's solo stuff, because his solo stuff ain't as like extreme as Strapping Young Lad, but it's still great stuff. It's still heavy metal. It's more eclectic. It's more eclectic. Now I actually did a you guys will know about that when you see my Devin Townsend Discovering Devin Townsend review, which will be dropping before this video by the time it comes out. But in any regards, check out Devin Townsend's music, check out his solo stuff. Also check out the podcast, the Devin Townsend podcast that he was doing a couple of years ago when we was in the midst of the pandemic, because he goes more in depth and gives a lot of like information about what went into the recording of these albums, as well as concurrently with his solo stuff. He talks a lot about like what was going on around him in his personal life and stuff, what influenced him to write these songs and put these records together. So definitely check that out. It's really cool to listen to him just go in depth about the memories and stuff when we went into these records, man. But yeah, Strapping Young Lad, man, one of the greatest extreme metal bands to ever exist. I'm so glad that I discovered them and got into their music, because they easily became one of my favorite bands. And I listen to them on a regular basis, man. I never get enough of listening. I never get bored listening to their music. But in any regards, if you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and hit the thumbs up and give me a like. That way it'll help with the algorithm. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button and tap that bell. That way you'll be notified when I drop new content. I want to give a huge shout out and a thank you to everybody that's subscribed to the channel, everybody that's been watching the videos, that's been supporting me. I truly appreciate it. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.